for joining us on FutureTV. I'm Linda Tamim, and these are today's top stories. Lebanese Forces leader Samir Jaja says the March 8 coalition is determined to obstruct the upcoming parliamentary session to elect a president. Taxi and truck drivers hold a protest demanding that the government increase their social security benefits and enact the National Transportation Plan. And Syria's President Bashar al-Assad officially announces his candidacy in next month's presidential election, which he is widely expected to win. Lebanese Forces leader Samir Jaja has criticized the March 8 camp for submitting blank ballots during last week's presidential elections, which he says resulted in the obstruction of polls. He urges the camp to choose a presidential candidate to ensure the success of Wednesday's election at Parliament. Jaja warns that persisting with such practices will jeopardize the elections and lead to vacuum. He adds that we must respect laws that demand the election of a president, not the creation of vacuum. Jaja warns against obstructing quorum during Wednesday's electoral session, saying that quorum is needed to ensure that the polls are held, and this factor should not be abused to hinder democracy. The second round of the elections will be held on Wednesday, with the candidate needing 65 votes to be elected president. Taxi and truck drivers have held a protest demanding that the government increase their social security benefits and enact the National Transportation Plan. The protesters drove slowly from Dora Highway and Kola Roundabout to Riyadh Solah Square, where they held a sit-in. Fuel truck drivers, along with bus drivers, also took part in the protest called for by the unions of land transportation to pressure the government to meet their long-standing demands. Meanwhile, employees at the Hariri International Airport have announced they will take part in a nationwide strike planned by the Union Coordination Committee, which represents teachers and civil servants. The protesters will also hold a protest in Beirut to demand Parliament to pass a controversial draft law to raise their salaries. Private and public school teachers warn they will boycott correcting final examinations to escalate the protest and further pressure MPs to pass the draft law. A meeting for the Lebanese-Palestinian Dialogue Committee has been held at the Grand Sarai today to discuss problems affecting the Lebanese-Palestinian relations amidst the current situation in the country. A meeting was also scheduled at the Palestinian Embassy in Beirut with representatives of various Palestinian factions and Islamist groups in a bid to prevent renewed fighting in Ain al-Helwi. The meeting was set to discuss ways to follow up on the implementation of a neutrality agreement signed by Palestinian factions in Lebanon in order to dissociate themselves from violence linked to the war in Syria. Palestinian sources say radical Islamist groups went on armed alert in Ain al-Helwi over the weekend, heightening tension in Lebanon's largest Palestinian refugee camp and raising fears of renewed fighting between rival factions. Military examining magistrate Judge Fadi Sawan issues two separate indictments calling for the death penalty against 32 suspects involved in gun battles in the northern city of Tripoli. In the first batch, 18 people, including Hussein Ahmed, who is in custody, were accused of forming an armed group with the purpose of carrying out terrorist activities, igniting sectarian strife and killing security forces. The second group includes 14 people, 2 of whom are in custody, and only one of them was identified as Jalal al-Haji. The state security has arrested Syrian Ahmad al-Shahadi in central Bekaa for belonging to al-Qaeda-linked al-Nusra Front and for recruiting gunmen to fight in Syria. Syria's President Bashar al-Assad registers to stand in next month's presidential election. The June 3rd vote will be held despite a raging war that began after a massive government crackdown on peaceful anti-government protests that flared in March 2011. Assad, whose term expires on July the 17th, is expected to sail to victory against his competitors. So far, 6 other hopefuls have announced their candidacy, most of them largely unknown. A posting on the presidency's official Facebook page quoted Assad as calling on supporters of different candidates to express themselves through the ballot box. Hisham Shahad, the country's electoral commission chief, says Syrians who fled their country via unofficial crossings will be barred from voting in next month's presidential election. And coming up next, 683 Muslim Brotherhood supporters in Egypt are sentenced to death. That and more after the break. Welcome back. An Egyptian judge sentences 683 alleged Muslim Brotherhood supporters to death, including the group's supreme guide Mohammed Badia, and confirmed the death sentences of 37 of 529 alleged supporters previously condemned. Mohammed al-Masiri, an Amnesty International researcher monitoring the cases, says they lacked basic fair trial guarantees. The defendants from the first case, whose death sentences were not upheld, are each sentenced to 25 years in prison. Many of the lawyers for the accused boycotted the hearing, demanding that the judge be recused and calling him a butcher. Lawyer Muhammad Abdul Wahab, who represents 25 of the defendants, says the verdict was handed down in a court session lasting less than 5 minutes. He adds the single session in the trial lasted just 4 hours, during which the judge refused to listen to any arguments from the defense. Special voting for security officials and hospital patients starts in Baghdad ahead of Iraq's first parliamentary elections since the withdrawal of U.S. forces in 2011. Police officers and army personnel in Baghdad's Karada neighborhood queued to cast their votes 2 days before the rest of the nation's voters can go to the polls to elect a new parliament. Voters went through 4 ID checks and search stations before they could enter the building, and some police officers came to cast their votes dressed in civilian clothes in order to attract less attention. The early balloting is meant to free up the 1 million-strong military and security forces for Election Day on Wednesday so they can protect polling stations and voters. More than 9,000 candidates are vying for 328 seats in Parliament, which is widely expected to be won by an alliance led by Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, who is expected to seek a third 4-year term in office. Abdelaziz Bouteflika has been sworn in as Algeria's president for a 4th term in a televised ceremony after his re-election in a campaign he was too sick to participate in. The 77-year-old has issued a brief statement in which he says his election was a victory for the state. Bouteflika, who was also in a wheelchair when he cast his own ballot on Election Day, has hardly been seen in public since a mini-stroke which confined him to hospital in Paris for 3 months last year. Official results showed he won 81.5% of the votes in an election marred by low turnout and claims of fraud by his opponents, including main rival Ali Ben Flis, who received just 12.18%. U.S. President Barack Obama says the United States was poised to unveil fresh sanctions against Russia over the Ukrainian crisis as pro-Kremlin gunmen seize another town in the east. Speaking in the Philippines, Obama says the sanctions will include export restrictions on high-tech goods in a bid to ratchet up pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin, blamed for the worst East-West crisis since the Cold War. Separately, top EU officials were to meet in Brussels to set up European sanctions on Russia as part of a coordinated global effort against Moscow. On the ground in eastern Ukraine, tensions remained at fever pitch as gunmen stormed the town hall and police offices, the latest in a string of assaults by insurgents on towns in the region. Meanwhile, the threat of a full-scale invasion looms over the ex-Soviet country, with tens of thousands of Russian troops massed on the border, and Ukraine's Prime Minister warning of efforts to start a third world war. Peacekeeping troops have escorted around 1,300 Muslims out of the Central African Republic's capital city, removing one of the last pockets of Muslims from Bangui, in a nation torn apart by religious violence. But some leaders fear that will make permanent divisions that have led to talk of partition after 18 months of conflict. More in this report.
Muslims in Central African Republic once again are fleeing. About 100 mostly women and children left the capital Bangui Monday, taking only what they could carry. They fear attacks from the Christian anti-Balaka militia. While this group is destined for bombaree in the country's center, others could very well leave the country altogether. Almost 200,000 have fled the country since December, according to the UN, and another 160,000 are expected to flee this year. A group of French troops escorted the refugees, but some anti-Balaka want to see all Muslims leave.
We don't want Muslims to stay in Bambari or Bria. They should leave directly for Chad. That's what we want.
As the convoys traveled through the country, there was no guarantee that these Muslims could return. So far, the 6,000 African and 2,000 French troops already there have failed to stop the violence.
If the country calms down, I will return to Bangui, but if the country doesn't calm down, I will stay in Bambari.
Another 12,000 troops will be deployed to the country in September as part of a UN peacekeeping mission.
And now for news around the world in brief, at least 14 people have been killed as tornadoes ripped through the United States of Arkansas and Oklahoma. Rescuers were digging the rubble of ruined buildings looking for more victims. Arkansas officials say there was a mass casualty situation and the number of people injured was reported to be numerous. An explosion has killed 3 children and injured at least 10 others, 6 seriously, at a religious seminary in the Pakistani city of Karachi. Police say the attack was caused by a hand grenade thrown inside the mosque as students were in class. The blast is the 3rd attack in a week in Karachi, a city where targeted killings for political, religious and ethnic reasons have been common in recent years. Australia's Prime Minister Tony Abbott says the hunt for a missing Malaysia Airlines plane will be expanded to include a massive swath of ocean floor that may take 8 months to search thoroughly. The U.S. Navy's Bluefin 21 robotic submarine has spent weeks scouring the initial search area for flight MH370 in the southern Indian Ocean, but has found no trace of the aircraft. Hollywood's most notable bachelor, George Clooney, is no longer on the yachting and canoodling single scene. There is plenty of speculation that British lawyer Amal Alamuddin may be the woman who converts Clooney from confirmed bachelor to family man. Here's the gossip.
It's official, George Clooney is off the market. Clooney has reportedly met his match in Amal Alamuddin, a 36-year-old Lebanese-born British lawyer who reportedly shares the actor's passion for crusading for international human rights. The latest news started with reports from the New York Post saying the couple are engaged to be married. Reports say the couple had hoped to keep the engagement quiet, but they can't hide the fact that they are very happy. Rumors started swirling about the couple's engagement after Alamuddin was spotted wearing an engagement ring while out with friends. Clooney was previously married to Talia Balsam and divorced in 1993. He has since had notable relationships with Sarah Larson, Elisabetta Canales, and Stacy Keibler. Clooney has been quoted in the past as saying he will never get married again after his divorce, and he has never talked about it since. He had said late last year that he realized being 52, unmarried and childless might not look good to the public, but that he shouldn't rush out and impregnate someone. But Clooney says he has no dislike or distrust of being married with children. A British website has ranked Alamuddin first in the 21 hottest barristers in London last July. A source working with Clooney has said earlier this year that she isn't someone who is pursuing a career in acting or entertainment, suggesting why she might be different from the long list of Clooney's ex-girlfriends.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. Lebanese Forces leader Samir Jaja says the March 8 coalition is determined to obstruct the upcoming parliamentary session to elect a new president. Taxi and truck drivers hold a protest demanding that the government increase their social security benefits and enact a national transportation plan. And Syria's President Bashar al-Assad officially announces his candidacy in next month's presidential election, which he is widely expected to win. Those are your Monday headlines from us here at Future Television. Catch us again tomorrow, same time, for more of the world's top stories.